So this is based on a report me and Maura Conway put together for the Radicalization Awareness Network back when I was working for Voxpol back in December of 2021. I have been informed it's been presented at the EU Internet Forum at this point, but God knows when they're going to publish it. It's coming soon. So, and what we wanted to look at was how this idea of actual Web 1.0 websites is kind of making a comeback in terrorist circles, that it's not about social media platforms anymore, that we had a focus on it in the early 2000s and then it dropped off because who cares about websites anymore, but as they've been kicked off, it's come back. So picture yourself, it's early 2000s, you're accessing the internet on a dial-up modem, you're waiting for a text page to scroll in, that's the kind of website we're talking about here, right? It's a static, read-only website, but it's not limited to them. Obviously, modern Web 1.0 websites are kind of multimedia hubs. They have podcasts, they have YouTube, embeds, etc. But really, we want to exclude things like forums, like 4chan or Stormfront from this research, social media platforms, messaging app, even the dark web, and really want to look at these websites which are like one-way communication, with the exception of like a contact us form that you're not sure if anyone ever reads. That's the only give and take between them, right? So it's that kind of website. More kind of alluded to this morning, but I think a lot of papers have alluded to this today, but like we're kind of taking an ecosystem approach on this based on the work of Bale, Brace and Cohen. And they conceptualized far-right as kind of an ecosystem along 4 levels. So we have entities, communities, biotopes, and then the whole network, so starting at entities and moving upwards. And we're really looking at focusing on entities, in particular individual domains here, which they included in their work as static websites. We split them into 3 categories, and we looked at about 8 in total. So the first one we looked at were actual terrorist-operated websites. So they're sites that are expressly or officially affiliated with a terrorist group or movement, and these are mostly operated by kind of older and more established terrorist groups. It's not limited by ideology, so you have left-wing ethno-nationalist groups like the PKK, you have extreme right groups like Blood and Honor, you have Hezbollah, you have Hamas, you have the Taliban. So we looked at the Taliban's website, we looked at the PKK's website, and we looked at Hamas's website for this one. The next category we had were supporter sites. So these are basically fan sites, and mostly in our research they're limited to ISIS fan sites. But not necessarily. So at the moment it's most prominently Islamic State fans. They're kind of IS supporters trying to push and spread propaganda that they own, but they're not being told to do it by the group as far as we know. They're just doing it because they believe in the cause, kind of thing. So we looked at 3 of them. Hard to substantively document these websites because they are the most subject to being taken down. So we looked at ecolab.de, but we looked at a different form of it as well before it got taken down, i3lam.pm and chinavislam.com. And the third category we looked at were ideologically adjacent sites or fellow travelers. So they're sometimes expressly, but mostly just kind of implicitly unaffiliated with particular terrorist groups. But they're ideologically supportive of one or more such of these groups or movements, and they're pretty extremist in their orientation. I think most people here would have heard of the first one we looked at with Daily Stormer. At the time it was .su that was hosting it. But we also looked at the Nordic Resistance Movement.org. And then we wanted to look at what these websites and categories are for, what they're actually aiming to do. And we used a framework that we adapted from Davies, looking at like how violent they are, how much they're interested in recruitment or just pushing propaganda. So starting at level 1, a fact-based one is just kind of reporting facts. We'll see in a minute how this plays out. 2 is kind of reporting facts, but also kind of using it to push you to join their respective causes, but in a peaceful way, right? Join protests, send money, that kind of thing. 3 is doing both of these things, but is explicitly calling for you to enact, is showing you violent imagery alongside it. And 4 is doing all of this, but also telling you that you need to actually commit violent acts yourself, join the cause in a military fashion, etc. We also want to look at what kind of recruitment presence is on these sites. None's pretty self-explanatory. If they don't mention recruitment or anything, it doesn't matter. One is kind of more passive, get involved, spread the word kind of thing. Indirect action, we pretty much take to mean fundraising, give us money, sell stuff for us, send us Bitcoin, that kind of thing. And then active is full on, come join the caliphate kind of stuff, right? It's join the movement in an actual military fashion. And when we rank them along these grades, we got a nice pattern here. So if we look at the 3 actual terrorist-operated websites, the Hamas site, the PKK site, and the Taliban site, well, first of all, in recruitment, none of them are recruiting. None of them care. They don't want you to join the cause. They're not telling you to go anywhere, to do anything. They don't care, right? In terms of extremism, Hamas basically just post dispatches from Hamas as a political party and then like media, international media articles on the conflict in Palestine, right? So they're not actually posting things themselves. They're just reposting like Reuters level stuff, right? That's all they're doing. To show like occupation crimes is what they call it. Similarly, the Taliban have an occupation crime scene where they show things that the then Afghanistani government did and the US coalition did in Afghanistan. They show you how their violence is retaliatory to these initial crimes against them. The PKK's one is a bit more extreme, where they do this and they show like their martyr section, but they also kind of call for you to oppose what they call the fascist Turkic government, that kind of thing. Right? Then we move on to the Daily Stormer, where the extremist scale jumps up to 3, where they explicitly shy away from violence. They say, we don't believe in violent actions, we're a peaceful movement, that kind of thing. But their language and the hatred that they expel and on particular people, and they're kind of nudging you towards violent acts in an implicit way. They just don't want to explicitly say it so they don't get in trouble. On a recruitment scale, they're basically always asking you for Bitcoin and money. Then the Nordic resistance movement and the extremism scale, they also say we're a non-violent movement, we're a peaceful movement, we don't want violence. In fact, they run a podcast, and one of their podcasters said that we're trying to be the sensible face of fascism. We want to be able to march in the streets without these effing idiots throwing rocks at our head, because we want to be a legitimate political force. But at the same time, they publish things like, in the aftermath of the Christchurch shooting, their leader posted a manifesto justifying it, saying why it was right to do the Christchurch shooting. So they can't really escape themselves in that way. The recruitment scale, they also ask for money, they also sell merchandise, and they also encourage you to go to protests. They want you to go camping with them in Scandinavia. They want you to join up with, say you're in Italy, they want you to join with Casa Pound there, or Der Weg in Germany. They want you to join the international movement, but in a peaceful way. They're not asking you to attack. And then the IS supporter sites are just pushing ISIS propaganda and all that entails, right? So in terms of displays of violence, calls for violence, we've all read The Beak, we've all read, right? So we know what's in there, and the recruitment scale, the same thing, right? They want you to join the caliphate. Sophistication is also something where we have runs the gamut. So we use a framework that we took from Moore's previous work on websites from 2005. So we looked at 6 basic components: presentation and appearance, accessibility, navigability, freshness, and visibility. So presentation and appearance are divided into 2 subcategories: flashiness and dynamism. So at the time, 2005, having nice graphics and having multimedia properties was the height of sophistication. Accessibility, you can have the flashiest site in the world, but if it takes a long time to load, if the servers don't work that well, how sophisticated really is it? Or if it's inaccessible. Navigatability is a big one. So, is there actually a search engine, a search bar? You can look up specific posts. This really varies based on from place to place. Freshness, how often do they actually upload content to these websites? And then visibility, how easy is it to find online? Can you just Google search these places? Right. Taking this approach, Nordic Resistance Movement had the most sophisticated website of the 8 we sampled. So in terms of, it's a modern multimedia website. It's got broad sections, modern graphics, as you can see here. It looks like a media website. They've got their own YouTube videos embedded. They've got their own podcast. They have their own kind of event spaces. It's not been banned, it's not been blocked, you can find it very easily, very easy to navigate. It's really a breeze to use in terms of these websites, right? It's compared to like the PKK, which looks like it's from 2001, right? It doesn't have a search engine, doesn't have anything. Right, there's a very long report, I'm trying to breeze you through it, right? So, onto online financing payments. We talked on this a little bit earlier. 5 of the 8 of them had a financing or payment aspect. It took 2 main forms. Primarily, it was financial contributions, but there was some sale of merchandise. Again, the Taliban, the PKK, and Hamas, they don't want your money, right? This is a specific website. It's a front-facing thing. It's to legitimize them. They're not asking you for donations. When you go to the Day Stormer, this kind of thing is really apparent. It's all very ironic. It's got some anti-Semitic jokes in it. It's got an anime girl, right? It's the way you'd expect it. All asking you to donate Bitcoin, but specifically Monero, which is coming up again and again in financing, terrorist finance. It's a very privacy-orientated Bitcoin where you won't get sold out if you use it, right? So. One of the ISIS support sites also has a donate link, but it really sends you to a Telegram channel where you can then donate by talking to someone who's on the Telegram channel more than actually like a wallet. And then the Nordic resistance movement had merchandising. They linked to a site called greenpill.com. And these products included Scandinavian language ebooks, clothing, posters, banners, coffee mugs, manifestos, and the like, right? In terms of reach, there's another disparity here, where the top 3 are so much more popular than the rest, right? Where in terms of Amazon Alexa links, which goes on 90-day cycles and daily page views, you can see the Daystormer is by far in the lead. Then Hamas and Taliban, and then everyone else. Some of these are not even ranked because they were disrupted so often, so you couldn't keep like the Alexa rankings just didn't work on them that well. But then looking at the ecosystem approach, we also want to look at in-links and out-links on them. So Hamas, despite being number 2 in terms of overall popularity, has the most in-links. And Daystormer has the second most highest at 147. But the difference is that Hamas gets linked to by media sites a lot. The same with the Taliban. It gets because they're in the news. At the time this is happening, the Taliban were basically becoming the Afghanistan government, so people were just linking to their websites a lot. Whereas the Daystormer actually gets linked by other kind of white supremacist movements. So whitepower.org, AryanNations.com, whitenationalists.org, etc. Conspiracy theorists linked to it. So this is the one might be more fruitful to look at the ecosystem of, rather than looking at Hamas or the Taliban, which really was just linking to the New York Times or Reuters or that kind of thing, right? So we have a disparity here in terms of both reach and popularity. The top 3 are way more popular than the rest. And this is probably in part attributable to how often the ISIS sites are taken down. That's definitely a factor. So quickly, in the last 5 minutes I'm just going to talk about the refusal of services. Yeah, it's all in here. So what we found is that traditional academic discourse surrounding content moderation is really focused on 2 layers of the tech stack, right, of how the internet operates. Yeah, we're always talking about how websites content moderate themselves and how platforms moderate themselves. But these are terrorist websites. I don't think they're going to be concerned with moderation, right? And they're not on Facebook. You could get them delisted off of Google, I suppose, right? But we barely ever talk about what kind of policies of content moderation occur on levels 3 through 7. And these are just as important, right? Because you can't ever get to here if you're barred from using here, yeah? So what we found upon looking was that the vast majority of them, or at least the majority of the websites we discussed, were all hosted or protected or provided services by Cloudflare, which is on number 4, yeah, the fourth layer of the thing. So Thomas also found that it hosted 46 of the 100 extreme right websites that she studied. So these included the Taliban website, Nordic Resistance, PKK, Shrine of Islam, so the two of the ISIS ones, and then the original Daystormer, which famously they had to drop after all the movements during the Trump rallies, and what really broke the camel's back is that they tried to say we're content neutral, we don't care what the Daystormer posts, we're just a web service, but then the Daystormers was like, aha, they're based, they're with us, they believe in our thing, and then they got dropped because then Cloudflare is seen like the Nazi provider, and they didn't want that kind of negative press. Okay. The Taliban website also went offline when we were doing this research, and it's widely assumed that Cloudflare did it, but they never said that they did it. What does this mean going forward? I mean, it means that these kind of services are essential to operate on the internet. If you don't have something like Cloudflare protecting you, you're just going to get DDoSed off the internet nearly instantly, especially if you're kind of a political website. And there's a lot of discourse going around about how, if you're booted off the free speech implications of being denied Facebook, but what about if you can't get a website online because none of the cloud services will take your money, so you just get booted off it constantly, as if there's a due process thing happening there. And then going forward, just a couple of recommendations we have. So we want to look further into what can we call a website and what isn't the website going, what are the pros and cons of narrowing the research and policy to terrorist opposite website and supporter websites. We want to conduct like an actual large-scale comparative study of at least terrorist websites and supporter websites, but we'd also like to look at ideological fellow travelers. There's been, on the other hand, there's been barely any research on the content policies and processes of layers 4 through 6 of the tech stack, which I think is I'm sure someone's going to write a brilliant paper on that at some point. There's a lot of legislation coming forward that will impact websites, including their takedown. So it'd be good to have a study that's collating and interrogating these laws. I'm sure Tech Against Terrorism is something that works about that. And the last one is something that we found that came up a lot is like the role of news websites in contemporary extremist and terrorist ecosystems, not just mainstream, but kind of the ones they run themselves, like the Al-Qaeda related Thabat news agency and the like. But that's it. Thank you very much.